All right, thank you, Guy Burney, Anita Davis, and Pastor Donaldson for joining us in a discussion of this crucially important issue about crime in the city of Youngstown. Each of you has a front row seat to what is going on in the city. So I'd like to start by asking you to give us your perspective as to why Youngstown has been in the grips of a crime wave for so many years. And let's start with you, Councilwoman, since you are a former police officer. And then we'll go to Pastor Donaldson and to Mr. Burney.
Well, let's start with there's no one answer to that question, and nor is it something new. I've said that at the Youngstown Police Department, we kept records of every homicide. Every single homicide is logged into a notebook since 1967. Handwritten into a notebook since 1967. Every single homicide. And one of the things that I noticed is that even back in 1967, Youngstown's homicide rate, regardless of its causes, but our homicide rate was far and above the national average. Okay, because you're looking.
Right.
And at that time, we had full employment.
Right.
Every steel mill was running. We didn't have General Motors yet, period. Every steel mill was running. The railroads were running. We had jobs aplenty. Drugs weren't prevalent. I said unemployment almost non-existent, but we still had a homicide rate that was out of proportion with the rest of the country. Why? And no one has ever said why. It's like, because today you'll hear, well, it's because of drugs. It's because of this. It's because of that. It's like, but it's been consistent in Youngstown. I'm sure it was like that before 1967, but in 67 is when they started keeping the book. So I don't know why. Why consistently, every year in, year out, regardless of our situation, we have a higher homicide rate that's out of proportion to the rest of our numbers through the country.
Was that, at that time, though, the mob was pretty strong? Was it?
It's still murder.
Yeah, but...
It's still murder.
Right.
No, I don't want to... Now you're saying, well, that's because of the mob. Well, now it's because of drugs. It still is.
No, what I was asking is, so was it going into the civilian population, basically? You know, did
What do
we
you mean by
have...
the civilian?
I mean, a lot of the homicides these days are younger people, in families feuding, you know, kids not being able to talk things out. I'm just wondering if these were more mob hits.
A lot of them were. Some weren't. You still had domestic violence. You still had murders that were retaliatory in nature. They were all happening back then, just as they are now. Now society uses the excuse, well, it's drugs. But my thing is, for Youngstown,
Yeah.
why have we in Youngstown been consistently higher than the rest of the country? And that's going all the way back, not just during the Mafia days. You go all the way back to the 1920s and 30s when we were having the murders and things over on the east side of Youngstown. So it's nothing new to Youngstown. And I don't know if it's because we're as an urban area. Because if you look throughout the country, you see that urban areas have a higher percentage of homicides and violent crimes than other areas.
Right.
I don't know if it's because there's proximity of people, but we haven't, I don't think that that we've addressed the bottom, not one single thing, but a major contributing factor for Youngstown's homicide rate and our nation's homicide rate is guns. It's not just because of the masses, it's been consistent because, while I say that, and I don't want to dominate this, I apologize, but urban areas, well, guess what? London is an urban area. New Delhi is an urban area. Are they having our problems consistently throughout? No.
Pastor, what's your perspective of the overall issue of why Youngstown has consistently had such a high crime rate, especially homicide rate and gun violence?
I think, like Ms. Davis, is not one answer, but I think one of the contributing factors that I see is there's a huge man gap. There's a huge father gap. And so when there's not a father in the home, there's not a protector. Not that moms don't protect, but there's particularly these crimes are done a lot by young males.
Right.
And when you don't have a father in the home to show you what a man looks like, how a man operates, how a man deals with conflict, and so on, at least a semi-healthy man, I think that contributes to a false view of manhood. And so now we've got a population of young people who don't know how to manage their emotions, who don't know how to deal with conflict, who are unchurched. They don't have a sense of conviction about right and wrong. And I think that's a direct relationship to the lack of male leadership in the community.
And Guy, that's basically what your focus is. So give us your perspective of
Okay.
what's going on in the city.
Okay.
And then let's talk about
absolutely.
what Pastor has talked about, the lack of a family unit
Okay.
headed by a father and a mother.
So I'm going to put it into some science terms. I do a lot of
Right.
research and data, and we want to put this into those terms. So I'll tell a quick story and then you'll understand.
Sure.
Miss Davis was right. Pastor was right. It's not one thing. I want to say that. We might have to, but so we're walking down this street and we come upon one dead fish. You may ask yourself, what happened to that fish? You walk down the same street, you see 3 dead fish. You're saying, my goodness, what happened to these fish? What are they doing? You walk to a lake and you see a fish kill of 1 million fish. If you ask me what's wrong with those fish, we're going to have a problem. Because the question should actually be, what's wrong with the water?
Right.
There's an environmental issue if things keep happening over and over and over again. Now, there's a lot of research out here, and there's 5. I'll talk about young people for a moment since we're going there. There's 5 places that they research why young people get in these bad habits: substance abuse, delinquency, school dropout, pregnancy, and violence. Okay, so in a community, they're called risk factors, is what we call them, and basically we can assess where young people will be based upon their risk factors. Not that they have to make those choices, but the percentage says if I have these things happen, I'm going to have a higher likelihood of these incidences. Basically what Ms. Davis is saying. She's talked about urban areas, right? Because they have these environmental factors that are there. I'll give you some. So the availability of drugs, that's one. The availability of firearms, that's one, right? The community laws and norms that are favorable toward drug use, firearms, and crime. So when I make these things a social norm in my community, in urban areas, she's right? It's easier for me to get involved in violence. How does my media that I watch portray violence? Is it something that we aspire to? Is it something that's cool or we want to connect to? Low neighborhood attachment and community organization. And then finally, economic deprivation. If I have all these things going on, the research tells us that as a young person, I'm going to have a much higher likelihood to be involved in violence. And it goes on to talk about the family unit and the school unit, but you kind of understand. So there's environmental factors that make it easier for violence to happen in your communities. And I'll leave it there and we'll continue.
Okay, so I've written about Youngstown for 40 years, ever since I came to Youngstown. And I even covered Youngstown city government. And every year, when spring came around, there'd be a spike in crime rate in the city of Youngstown. In fact, we called it the rite of spring in the city, where crime was the front page story consistently. And we talked about all of these things going on. And I recall having a conversation with McCullough Williams and Reverend Lonnie Simon. And at the time, Ron Daniels was around. And we talked exactly about these issues, about what was going on in the families, in the homes. and talked about dysfunctional homes in the city of Youngstown. And it was just not confined to the black community, it was also in the white community. And then when the mills closed and there were 50,000 people put out of work, that exacerbated the problem. Over the years, there have been discussions about what to do about the family. And Pastor Donaldson is on a committee that they're pursuing a proposal that was the brainchild of Judge Delick, juvenile court judge Teresa Delick, to create a boarding school to take at-risk children out of the homes and put them in a boarding school setting. And the backlash from black leaders, members of council, members of school board, was intense. So how do you address this if indeed one of the underlying problems in the city is a dysfunctional family, a lack of a family, cohesive family unit? How do you address that? And what needs to be done?
To the aspect of the school. Well, let's remember that one of the things that I had an issue about it. That's like, so you're going to take and create a boarding school in Youngstown, and to bring in at-risk kids from throughout the county. There have been at-risk kids within the city. I could see that, but because we could fill the boarding school, but certainly, you know, one of my objections to it was you're bringing kids from the outside. And I'm just not going to. If you're going to do that, then build it out there. My suggestion would be, if you're going to do a boarding school kind of setting, take it to where the outside environment is not a problem environment. I've never understood why you want to. I mean, I love my city, but there's a lot of chaos. But if you want to take it and do a boarding school, take the boarding school and put it in a more rural and tranquil area to get the kids away from the environment in totality. Because when the kids go outside and they start walking in the neighborhoods and they run into some of the same things, pull them out of that setting altogether.
Was that not on the table?
I don't know.
The
You would have to
location?
ask him.
Yeah, I mean, there was so much misinformation as we went through the idea of a boarding school that all the facts got jumbled up in a whole bunch of rhetoric. And at the end of the day, people did not want a boarding school in their community with quote unquote at-risk
Troublemakers,
population,
basically. Yeah.
because they viewed those kids as troublemakers.
Right.
Now, I've been working with kids over 30 years. I've worked with kids in every capacity, through residential treatment, through the court system, through high school, intervention, you name it, I've done it. And I believe that if you put kids in an environment and you keep a high standard, they will adjust to that standard. And so, and with familial support, they can be as successful as anybody else. And so the boarding school idea was an idea to try to strengthen young people and break the cycles, breaking cycles of poverty. And changes, you know, I'm on the Youngstown City School Board now. Change is just very difficult in this area. It's difficult all over, but this area is a whole lot different. And I think because we've gotten burned so often, people have ridden in with ideas and we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and they haven't followed through. And so ultimately, we have the same population, and that I still believe has the potential to break a lot of the cycles. Leadership, we've got to change our leadership dynamic. And we've got to, in my opinion, we've got to earn the right to be heard.
Guy, you work a lot with families. You work a lot with young people.
Absolutely.
You work a lot with young people who have, you know, crossed the line as far as crime goes and all of that. What are you hearing? What do they tell you as far as what's going on in our community?
So one, let me just say this. I think we have to start to change our perception of people who make mistakes.
Right.
That's one.
Explain that.
So one of the things you won't hear me call a young person is at risk. They have some at-risk environmental issues, but they're not. They're a person, and so those types of conversations actually, in the eyes of many people, devalue that. That's why when you say I want to bring a school of at-risk kids into the community, people have an issue because I would too living there. But it's our perception of the kids. They're not,
Right.
they just had issues, but they're kids. And so our value and how we look at our population there has to be an adjustment of those norms. And so that's one. Kids, what I found out is that unfortunately parents want their kids to be successful, but they don't know what to do all the time because we have a serious break in family structure. And I'm not going to, we have a serious issue in foundational. When you start to look at the numbers of how families are constructed, you would see that the CDC itself has a way of preventing violent crime, youth gun violence. And the first thing they talk about is promote family environments that support healthy development. So if you have a community where that is a challenge, now you have a challenged community. And the only way to do that, I agree with both, is generationally. We have to do that. Ms. Davis and I were in an amazing conversation about how to reconnect generations to young people. And she has a plan that she's working on, and I'm going to help, because what the premise is that we get elders and people who have been around and who are stable to connect with young people who may have issues, but they come together, right? I'm not going to be religious, but what I will say is one of my favorite books says, I call young people because they're strong, and I call older people because they're wise. So if we put strength and wisdom together in neighborhoods, we can make a change. But if I have strength without knowledge, it's dangerous, right? Or if I have strength without development and maturity, it's dangerous. And that's what we're experiencing. And I know we're going to get in the whole gun conversation. When I, as a young person, I'm 16, 15, 14, I have a gun in my hand, my brain development isn't at the point to make a good choice yet. I'm all emotional.
Right.
And I'm all reactive. And so a situation that should just be a conflict turns into a death. And so, you know, I'm saying I'm agreeing with them because it's correct. Family structure. We were just talking about a young man, if I might share. I was just at a meeting with a number of my people, and he said he talked to a young man yesterday, and he says, man, can I talk to you just because my mom doesn't understand me? He's a 15-year-old young man. My mom doesn't understand me, and I just need to run some things by somebody, and I don't really have anybody to do, and my friends are my same age. And the young man said, hey, man, my door is open for you, the man. And so that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with young people who are getting drawn into craziness because their circles are doing the same things they are. And so it's going to be important for us to look at the whole gamut. She's right. The answer is an accumulation of things that will turn into things getting better. We have to decide what those things are. It's an accumulation. It's not one thing. You know, I know we're going to talk about guns, but if we don't talk about family with guns, we're still going to be at the same place. If we don't talk about schools with guns, we're going to be at the same place. It's an accumulation of all these things at all of our levels that will help us to move the needle where we need it to move. So I'll stop there.
Can you explain a little bit more about what kind of a program you're talking about? This sounds like a huge undertaking, and I'm just wondering how you are going to identify the kids that need some
Yes.
family structure, and what kind of a program are you going to put together to get them to actually participate?
Well, let me say this. I have councilmen here, and they're starting to help with this process. So I appreciate them. But what happens is there's a continuum that we use. It's a prevention to intensive intervention continuum. What I mean by that is we know we have to hit every one of those points to make a difference. There's many kids. Let me say this too, because there's so many kids that in our area that are doing wonderful. And we don't take the time and really look at that. There was almost 1,000 kids graduate over these past 2 weekends.
Right.
Now, unfortunately, we did, and I knew the young man that just passed away personally. He was in some of my programs. Wonderful family, and it's gonna be rough to get through it. But
With
we had
the father.
Yeah, with the father. The father. We had 1,000 kids graduate who are graduating with degrees and going on to college and playing sports. And so what we cannot do is not concentrate and take our focus off of those. So that I said that to say we still have to do prevention programs, because there's a lot of good kids doing a lot of good things. The other piece is then we have interventions, because we do have the set of kids. They're on that bubble where they're carrying guns already. You know what I mean? They're already trying to join gangs, right? They're already into things that they shouldn't be in. They're already using drugs, but they're not gone yet. So we have to intervene on those young men.
And in this regard, you, Councilwoman Davis, being a former police officer, and you, Pastor Donaldson, have a role in intervention. Let me say why.
Yes.
The president just announced, after the killing in Texas, the massacre in Texas, he says he wants cities that received American Recovery Funds to hire more police officers, to do more community policing, to put more cops on the streets, to do more patrolling. He says, why are you people sitting on this money? Go out there, spend the money on policing, put police
He was
in the...
president, he wasn't a police officer.
Well, let me finish. So,
I was just
so
saying.
they're talking about community policing.
Yes.
And having cops in the neighborhoods walking the beat that they used to. And Pastor Donaldson, let me ask you this. When I was talking to Pastor Harrison one day, before the committee meeting on the boarding school, I said to him, I said, what role are the churches, especially in the black community, playing like they used to play in the old days? If there was a problem in a neighborhood, you'd have these pastors getting together immediately, intervening. And I know this because Mac Williams would call me, or Pastor Simon would call me and say, hey, we're trying to do this because of what has happened in the neighborhood. He said to me, church attendance has gone down. And so pastors don't have that direct link to people in the neighborhoods.
That's why I asked that question.
Yeah.
Because that did used to be a main avenue to make those connections. So how are you going to make those connections now with those families that have at-risk kids? And I have another question, because I think it was you, Guy, who said these young men. Is it just a problem with the young men, or are there young women also?
Yes, I say young men because that's what you see in our numbers say that those are the young men, those are the people who are dying, but young women are being shot, young women are facilitating, the violence that
They
we're
are.
a part of. Yes, and so, and the other more important thing is young women are raising these young men. Mm-hmm. And so now that becomes a critical area of focus if we want to right-size this as well.
So let's talk about your perspective about community policing, cops on the beat,
It was
and all
about
of that.
community policing. I'm going to cut you off. It was when he said, just putting cops out there. Cops are not the solution. We have had our department fully funded, fully staffed. I came on, we had a police department. My badge number was 214. As a patrol officer, my badge number was 214.
Wow.
As a patrol officer. That meant that we had a police department that was close to was about 350.
Right.
Okay? So it's not the police officers. It is about them getting back to the street, but it's a fallacy if you think they're going to be walking the beat. Maybe putting them in golf carts, my thing, and things like that, so they can actually move about on a
Right.
faster pace. But we do have to have officers who truly care about our communities. Okay, I will tell you this: a police officer who does not care about the community in which they serve, we don't need them. Let's start with that one. I don't care who I offend with that one.
Wow.
You better care about my city. I'm not saying that you care about my city like you do your home, because that's your home. I care about my home. You guys care about your home. But you have to care about my city. You have to care and respect the residents of my city. Okay? And I'm not saying...
And if you're a cop and you choose not to live in Youngstown,
Yeah.
what message does that send?
Right.
Well, you know, that's saying that you might want to live in the country. It's not the message that I would have, that I would choose to, but it is their right. Okay? But while you live outside, though you may live outside the city, you still must respect the city's residents and care about them and do your job, not take a paycheck, do your job. You can't go up there and have, can I say hissy fit? I said hissy fit. See, that was nice. A hissy fit and still take the paycheck. You can't do a slow down and still take the paycheck. Do your job. And if you think this, when you do your job, you, as a police officer, you're doing community policing. It's not something special, you know. It's just treating each other the right way. You know, instead of being the I never allow people to treat me as the boogeyman for their kids. Oh no,
That's right.
you're the parent.
Yeah, that's good.
You better be the boogeyman. You're with that kid 23 hours a day. You know, I'm there for 5 minutes and then I'm gone. But anyhow, I have to apologize.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do need community officers out there doing community policing work. The mind has to be more than I'm here to arrest. You're there to be a presence. And you are a role model as a police officer. Whether you want to be or not, you are a role model. And be a good one, you know. So all those things come into play. I would also say, going back to what these two gentlemen were talking about, we have to get with these kids at a much younger age.
That's right.
Since we understand that the prison pipeline is from, what, third grade?
Yeah.
Oh
I
my
think I was
God.
right, third grade, right?
That's right.
Third
Really?
grade.
Yeah, it is.
Prison
grade.
pipeline is third grade?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, if you want to speak, so
Yeah.
So
third
that's like
grade
what,
scores-
nine years old?
Yeah, so third grade scores. So
Eight.
there's two.
Eight.
Third grade scores are determining the build
Right.
of prisons, because they can rationalize that if this young person doesn't have literacy by the third grade, it's slow moving. We also know that 12 and a half is the number now where kids are making their decisions on behaviors. So it's not 14, it's 12, it's sixth grade. At sixth grade, a kid is deciding, this is how I'm going to function and move. And so we must do that. I want to piggyback on what she said though about officers, because I'm proud of what we're doing, is that we understand that police officers are police officers though. And so we have to keep this in mind. We
They're not
often,
parents.
we want community police officers, but we have to understand we need officers as well. And so what council has approved that we're working on right now is having mental health advocates to work align with officers. Because remember, we want our police officers to do their work.
Yeah.
It's important work because we have to solve things. But we also know that the families have needs, social, emotional, psychological. And so we've aligned, they just approved it, so we're excited that we've aligned mental health advocates to go out on those situations where they can now be the conduit to the resources to families. And I think that's an important piece
Yeah.
that we haven't had,
Yeah.
that's going to, one, help officers, but two, help our community, because we have to keep clear. I want my officers to care. We do. We want them to care and be out there, but we want them to be police officers as
Right.
well. And so,
Who was a police officer? Let's go back to about the role of the police officer.
yeah.
A role of the police officer is the restoration of peace and tranquility to the community.
Wow.
Let me say that again. The restoration of peace and tranquility. I didn't say perfection. Tranquility and peace. Because without those things, how are we going to grow? How are we going to do anything? if it's total chaos. So you want to work towards that. Okay, but going back to the thing about the third grade, so we know it's a third grade where a lot of these things are starting to happen. We need to get with these kids at a younger and younger age. It always sounded weird when they say, well, maybe you need to have somebody talk to these kids when they're like in second grade and first grade. What some people are seeing, yes, some of them do. Okay, it has to be there. If you get a kid who's in foster care, I believe that they're required to go through therapy. Am I wrong? Or some sort of session.
Depends on their diagnosis.
Yeah. So, and I'm not saying this for all of our kids. I'm just saying we need to be aware that there's a lot of factors at a younger and younger age, and then teach these kids these coping skills. The reason why we talk about, and I'm going to shut up, about the playgrounds and things is because at the playgrounds and things when we were little, I don't know about y'all kind of young. Bertram, you and I, okay. You're kind of young too. Okay. But, what can I say? But you learned, you really and truly learned how to play with each other and develop these coping skills in school and on the school playground. Because you went outside, you had to play with the kids. You had to learn how to get along together. Once in a while, somebody would have a fight, a little pushing and shoving, but for the most part, you would get pulled aside and say, no, that's not how we work it out. So we have lost so many different things, Bertram.
And Pastor Donaldson, while it is true that, especially in the inner cities, that there are homes, broken homes where whoever the adult is drug addicted, is not able to care for the children in the home and all of that. There also are homes where, say it's led by a mother who works 3 jobs in order to keep that home going. So, she comes home at 10 o'clock at night after leaving the home at 6 in the morning. It's tough for that mother to sit down with the child and say, let's do homework. All right, so what role should the churches be playing in trying to fill that gap of these broken homes where children don't have the kind of adult supervision, care, love that, quote, normal homes
Nurturing.
Nurturing, that normal
Love.
Yeah, love.
Yeah.
Love.
We used to have in our community those outlets and those relationships. That's the key. You have to have relationships with these families. Otherwise, they're not going to let you in, no matter how qualified and no matter how sincere you are. And so the church, we are past the day where people are coming to the church.
That's
We're way past that day. That's one of the reasons why I coach. You reach kids in their sphere of influence, and you can reach them as a coach. That's why I teach. I volunteered at East for I've been back for 15 years, and I volunteered the entire time. And for the first probably 3 years that I walked the halls over at East High School, it was extremely challenging. But after a while, those kids knew that, hey, that guy, he'll be here on Wednesday, he'll be here on Friday. And it wasn't that I was walking around with the Bible, because I didn't. I didn't go around preaching sermons, any of that. I listened to Mr. Bernie talk about risk factors. I was that kid that had several of the risk factors. I was one of those kids that could have gotten involved in crime and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, the church has to, you can't be afraid of the kids. You've got to develop relationships with them. And as I said earlier, you have to earn the right to be heard. It's not until you build a relationship with these kids on their terms that you're able to speak into their lives when times get difficult. You have to earn that. I might not be your age, but I'm 54 years old.
Baby.
we were raised to be respectable to all adults, no matter if they were what we would consider worthy or not. But this generation is not that way.
Right.
You have to earn their respect, and so we need to change our whole mindset as it relates to reaching out to our kids. If we go to our kids with "you're the problem" mentality, you will never build a relationship, and when times get difficult, with their immature minds, they will never reach out to you because they know that you think they have a flawed mental concept of life. You have to earn it. You gotta. I'll just say this, and one of my professors when I was in school, he said, he says, one of the problems that you have is you don't have any tolerance. And I thought it was a compliment. He says, you don't put up with much. And I said to myself, that's right. I don't put up with any stuff. And he went on to say, he says, but you're going to have to learn how to tolerate some things and earn the right to be heard. And so my reputation in the community as it relates to the kids has been earned. They can care less how many degrees I have. They can care less what my experience has been until I get down on their level and understand them where they are. Now, I don't know, and that takes time.
Yeah.
You asked about the church. How do we get the churches involved? It's easy to go to a gas station and do a prayer rally for 2 hours.
Right.
Nothing wrong with doing prayer rallies. Nothing wrong with marching around the city. But what's going to take some time is you can't fix 200 kids. You can take maybe 2 though, and you can invest everything that you have into 2 kids. You can call them. You can take them to Handles to get some ice cream. You can have a relationship with them and build that relationship, and that takes time. And that's how you break the cycles. There has to be some type of intervention, but it takes time.
So if the schools are the avenues to make the connections, Youngstown has a plethora of retirees. Is it incumbent on the school board and I don't know who else, maybe the school administrators, to have a mentorship program or have because I would venture to say very few people in this town even know that you can volunteer at one of the city schools. And if they do, they probably don't know how to go about doing it. So is it incumbent on the school board to start a program like that or do some kind of outreach to the community to make use of all of these retirees who probably have time and experience and nurturing experience, if nothing else, to offer?
I don't know whose responsibility it is, to be honest, but I do know that our schools have gotten so little support, and that's why there's such a turnover in education. They don't get the support that they need. There's a lack of consistency. From year to year, they don't know what's going to happen. Curriculum changes. Everything is moving, and there's a lack of stability in the home. There's a lack of stability in the schools. And so this is a social problem, and all hands have to be on deck. It's not the school. It's not just the police officers. It's all of us have to be in relationship with one another and have a strategic plan on how we're going to address crime, how we're going to address education, how we're going to address social issues. So it's got to be a team effort.
Okay, so let's talk about the reality of crime in Youngstown. When a 16-year-old playing basketball gets shot and killed, it's a story that's not only a local story, it becomes a national story, because 16-year-olds playing basketball shouldn't be shot to death. So after the shooting in the subway in Brooklyn, Curtis Lewa, the creator of the Guardian Angels, and I think you'll remember the time when the Guardian Angels did come to Youngstown and patrol some of our streets.
And left quickly.
He said, and he was interviewed, and he said, you know what? With all the shootings that are taking place in New York City, it's time to bring back the stop and frisk policies that were in place during Mayor Bloomberg's administration. And he also said it's time to get tough, which is don't turn a blind eye to anything that's going on. If there's loud music being played in a car, stop that car. If windows are being broken in abandoned homes, go after the people who are breaking the windows. If people are congregating in corners, in the corners or at neighborhood stores, go after them and break those up.
Who's he suggesting to go after them? The private citizens or the police?
The people in the neighborhoods are demanding that. And so the question I have is it time in Youngstown for this kind of tough policing until we get a handle on the crime situation?
It's a backwards word.
Mm.
That is
Mhm.
getting tough. You could say we could take a zero tolerance approach to speeding. That's not getting, that's just enforcing the law. You're just enforcing the law. But this whole notion of getting tough, it's like, what are we, some beasts that have to be taken and tamed and controlled? No. The police officers just do their job. And you're not getting tough. You're saying, turn down your music. That's not getting tough. That's turn down your music. That's something that's every day. That's not getting tough. You're loitering and stuff like that. First off, depending upon where you are, quote, loitering, you have a constitutional right to loiter, to stand. And you can shout at the top of your lungs. You don't lose your rights because you cross the borders into the city of Youngstown. Yes, there are some things that the police officers can do, but that notion about we're going to get tough. Well, you know what you get tough? What that does? Okay, you get tough, and we'll get tougher. But what you are saying though is that somehow or another we got to go like this here. Like somehow or another we in the city, well, we need something harder because I'm not going to go there, but there's a message that you're saying when you say about getting tough. Well, the guy who did the thing in Baltimore, shall we go to where he lived at? Because after all, he's a product of a suburb. So is the other one, products of suburbs. Do we go to the suburbs and say, let's get tough on those parents who allow their kids, who produce those kids? They are the parents. Is there any parental? Are we looking at their households? The households of the person who's up there, who's dropping 10 bodies? He says, I'm going to travel 200 miles to go find me some black people to gun them down. Let's go to where he lived at and say, let's look at where his environment. Do we need to enforce the law? Yes, enforce the law.
Most, at least well thought out African Americans, when we hear those words like get tough, it means something totally different to us than it does to the average person.
Yeah, and Curtis Lewa is white.
Let me say this. So this is what we're doing in Youngstown. And Ms. Davis, is we are, I was tasked, we are going to make sure that people are not carrying weapons that they shouldn't have to harm people where they are. We don't want that, and no community wants it. But we're also, I totally agree, we are providing, our officers will be providing resources to people who get stopped. You shouldn't speed through a neighborhood, not because we're getting tough, but because there's kids that may be playing there, and you can hurt them. So we have created, we're creating impact cards that literally have a website where people in a car can receive resources for the help that they need. Because we realize violence, and Ms. Davis can tell you better than I, is a group of people that is much smaller than the regular population. So what I mean by that is a very small percentage of people cause the most issues. And so we have to handle those people. That's intensive intervention, but we also have to provide those environmental pieces that we've been talking about all day so that people can get better and stabilize themselves. And so what we're doing, what our chief is doing, is we're stopping people. Yes, we have other agencies, I believe, that will be coming in, right?
In the county?
Yeah, they'll be coming in, and we're going to make sure that people are following the laws, but they're not going to, they're not taking a mother in who's a single mother who just had a, driver's license suspension a couple weeks ago. No, we're going to give her the resource to get herself squared, and then move on. So following the law is one thing. Not having, as she said, a zero tolerance, or just making sure that everyone is following the law. That's what we're going to do in our neighborhood. But again, the approach and the notion of getting tough is very controversial in terms of urban African American communities, because it means something else. It doesn't mean following laws. It means that we have to bring you. We have to.
Get you in
I don't even
line.
want to say like
Under
cattle.
control.
Like
Yeah,
we
get
have
you
to
down.
herd you and make sure you're
Yeah.
doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
I
And
believe
that's
the
not the thought
word
process.
used by one individual who's now gone was that dealing with our kids, well, you're dealing with a bunch of feral children.
Oh, my.
Wow.
And if you have that perception of our kids, I don't want you around my child.
Oof.
My child might not be the perfect child, might get in a little bit of trouble. They may do some major things, but my child is not a feral. Feral is what you associate with an animal.
Yeah.
And that's why I took that offense about getting tough.
Yeah.
We just give people, I've always said, you don't have to respect the police. That's nothing. Obey the law.
But the other thing is, when I hear that, you need to respect your neighbors. There needs to be respect in the neighborhoods, because I find a lot of people that I talk to, I call the police a lot. The other day there was probably 30 motorcycle couples riding down my street, blaring music. I couldn't hear myself think. So I called and said, these guys need to be stopped. Tell them to use earbuds. I think a lot of people that I talk to, when I tell them that I do that, they're like, oh, I don't know. I don't want to upset my neighbors. I don't want to talk to my neighbors. And I think the part of it is that if you don't call about zoning issues, for instance, the neighborhoods start to deteriorate. And it seems that there's a lot of fear among neighbors to even talk to each other, let alone report issues that they have, so that everybody can stay safe.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure
It's a reminder.
how you address that, but it's the respect for each other in your neighborhood that has to be addressed too.
So I think it's what Pastor said about relationships.
Yeah.
There's a guy, Dr. Comer, out of Yale University. He says, no significant learning occurs without significant relationship. And so basically, I can't teach you anything unless we're connected. And that's
Yeah.
the same with neighbors. If I don't know you, then there's a fear there.
Yeah.
And when we're afraid of people, fear makes you act out of character.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you're afraid of your neighbor, when you're afraid of law enforcement, when law enforcement is afraid of the community, you act out of character. You do things out of fear, flight, fight, freeze, right? And then that allows you to make decisions that you really shouldn't. So in our neighborhoods, one of the pieces is that we have to give back. So we have to get back to family. We have to get back to foundation. We have to get back to neighborhoods. But that's what the folks in her ward on the South, they're working on it, to really get back to connected neighborhoods. Before COVID, how you guys were meeting at that restaurant. It was amazing. They would have people come in and just talk. She invited me. I've come and just
The
we sat
Jamaican
down.
Is that the-
restaurant.
Yeah, well, who-
Yeah. Flambeau's? Is
Yeah,
that-
and it was just
Yeah, she liked the curry.
yeah, but I mean, but it was. But what I'm saying is, that's the kind of
Right.
thing that facilitates
Right.
understanding and knowing each other. And then I'm not afraid because I know that's your son. Listen, tell that boy
Yeah.
to turn his music down when he
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
down my street. And I'm not afraid of retaliation because we know each other. We've eaten dinner together.
Yeah.
Right? And that we have to get back to that. I grew up on the south side of Youngstown on Brentwood. I knew that if we made too much noise, over Miss Smith's house, we were going. She's telling we're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
But I knew Miss Smith because she made us cookies and I cut her grass. And so those are the types of neighborhood projects that we're sitting here as institutions. This is not institutional.
Yeah.
This is neighbors and relationships connecting
Rebuilding
back
our
to each other.
neighborhood.
Yes, ma'am.
If we don't, he's a nice kid. I've known him since he was like day high. But when his friends come over, they'll be playing their music a little loud, and once in a while I have to take my little phone and do the flashlight out the window. Okay, that's all I do. And he tells his friends, okay. But most of the time, it's like clockwork. They're like, it's Miss Nina, it's 11 o'clock. We gotta turn the music down. They turn the music down automatically. But like he said, these are neighbor things. We don't do neighbor things that much anymore.
Right.
A lot of times because we're afraid of each other.
Yeah.
Right.
We're so afraid of each other, and if, once they get to know each other, that's why the kid, I got to do this. This is all I got to do, okay? Because he's known me since he was yay high. But if we have our neighborhoods being neighborhoods again, we don't do. COVID contributed to a lot.
What happened to the
more.
Neighborhood Watch program that at one point was really very active?
Well, they were younger. Okay, let's be honest about it. They were younger. I was younger.
Yeah.
They got, as you get older, the neighborhoods change. Sometimes the people who move in don't have that same involvement. They don't feel as part, so welcoming. I have the Boulevard. They do a welcoming packet when you move into the neighborhood.
Yeah.
And a lot of them don't do that kind of stuff anymore. But it's to bring you in. But this is where we, as the city part, council part, where we try to promote for me at least, promote the rebuilding of our neighborhoods, because that's where it all starts.
Yeah.
Literally, your neighborhood is not 3 blocks down and 4 blocks down. Your neighborhood is your street.
Right.
Okay, because if he acted a fool, when you didn't get home in time and you were running up the street because the street lights were coming on, you knew you were about to get your butt whooped.
Absolutely.
Okay, it's your street. Your neighborhood is your street, and maybe for me it was Earl, Chicago, Glen Haven.
Yeah, I live on the upper north side, and my neighbor is Sarah Brown Clark. You better not have your music out late at night. She gets out of the house, walks down the street.
She walked down the street.
She did. And when I talked to her about it, she said, I told him to turn his music down.
Yeah.
I said, okay.
But you have to know the kids.
Yes, that's right.
You have to. You may not know every kid, but you kind of okay. He lives over there, but you got to have some sort of relationship. But they keep
Earn
talking
the
about
right to be heard.
okay, and that earned right is not something that's hard. Just the fact that you say, greeting each other.
That's right.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Right.
I mean, we don't even greet each other like we used to.
Why?
And so that's okay. So that's
God's specialty.
No, that's a social norm, and we've allowed social norms to change in our neighborhoods. For instance, anybody remember those big station wagons? So my uncle, you guys remember Halloween? I think about this. I'm like, this is crazy. But on Halloween, my uncle would get his big station wagon with the paneling on the side.
Yeah.
We lift up the back hatch. It'd be like 13 of us in the car. We ride around, jump out, go trick-or-treating, jump back in, right? And just ride around. Check out one thing we did not put on. Seatbelts.
Yeah.
Oh,
Nope.
right.
There was absolutely no
Right.
seatbelt.
Yeah.
In fact, the seatbelts were brand new. The car was old, but the seatbelts still had the rubber band things on them because we never used them. That was a social norm.
Yeah.
Look how we've changed it to now,
Yeah.
where you have 13-year-olds sitting in the back seats, and everybody is using seatbelts because there was a concerted effort
Yeah.
to change the social norm about how we move around. We can't be satisfied with social norms that are not helping us, that are not positive. We have to effectively and go after this is not normal. For instance, we have this social norm happening now, and I don't want to get controversial, with marijuana in young people. I'm not talking about adults. I'm talking
Right.
about kids who are not able to smoke because they're not old enough. They're still, this is proven, they're still doing the research on the brain to see how it affects you.
Right.
We don't even know yet, but we've legalized it based on whatever. And so now kids, what are they norming? They're norming that it's okay.
Yeah.
Because the adults in my life or around seems to be okay.
And drug addiction specialists will tell you, marijuana is a gateway drug,
They'll tell you
whether you want to buy it
I
or
believe in
not.
legalizing it.
And
And
sort
so,
of,
so I mean, I'm okay. I'm just, it's just a point. It just is. I'm not saying right or wrong about. I'm just saying we will have a social norm and it changes. Why not have a social norm where we connect back into our neighborhoods?
Which is where the
which
churches-
was normal.
Which
right?
is where the
That's what I'm
churches
saying.
can play a role in creating social norms.
Yeah.
And isn't that right, or is that too far gone?
Yeah, I don't think it's too far gone, but I do believe though that there has been, as an advocate of the church, I'm a strong ambassador for the church. We've wounded people. We've been hypocritical.
Wow.
Leadership has, and you see scandals popping up all the time. We've damaged people. And so I think what society needs is an authentic church. Every organization that calls itself a church, I don't believe is a church.
Could you define authentic church?
So the word church is really ecclesia. The Greek word ecclesia, it means called out of. So the church is not, number one, is not a building. It's not a building. It's a people that have been called out of a riotous life to a life of peace and servitude. And so because of what Christ has done for us, so when a group of people that call themselves a church go out into the world, we serve. That's what the church is about. Jesus, ironically, he says, I don't want to preach, but he says, I didn't come to be served. Jesus, who is our model, he says, I didn't come to be served, but I came to serve and to give my life as a ransom for many. And so if he is a model of what we're supposed to be doing, if I am a Christian, I ought to be serving and giving my life to make life better for somebody else. That's what Christians do. But Christians are not perfect people. And so we've got to regain credibility in the church by being honest, one, about our failures, and then secondly, keep the standard, the biblical standard, high for us to shoot towards. It won't be done overnight, but it's one person at a time. There are broken, flawed people in the church, and people have really frowned on the church because of people who've made mistakes. I'm high on grace. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. And yet, here I am as a leader in the community, supposed leader anyway. And so I try to give other people the same grace that God gave me. And so we're not the heroes in the community. We're just people who understand what God has done for us as individuals, and we want others to experience the same grace and peace.
When this program will be broadcast, Ohio's new gun law will have taken effect. And that gun law, concealed carry, says you don't need a permit, you don't need training, you don't need a background check.
That's crazy.
Okay? And the governor, who, Republican Mike DeWine, who after the Dayton massacre talked about the need for common sense gun laws, signed this bill. Police departments, police chiefs, police officers, law enforcement types, all said, this is not good public policy, and yet it is going to become law. Tell me what it does, what a law like this will do to a city like Youngstown that is already dealing with major gun violence. Let's start with you, Anita.
Let me say first off, if you have a gun, you should be trained. It's about the training. literally you're saying, hey, everybody just get a gun and walk out there with no training. That's the whole thing. The whole thing about the permitting portion of it was that you got training.
Right.
Training in how to use your firearm, to respect but its ability to take a life, because that's what guns are for. They're not hammers. A gun is not a hammer. It's designed for one thing, killing. Let's stop, being foolish. Okay? But get the training, and you got your training about how to handle it, respect it, and the law. Okay? I don't like that part of it. The fact that they don't have to show their gun to people, to the police officer, okay, I don't like that. But that's not the biggest problem. It's the fact that everyone should be trained before you get the gun. Show me that give me a piece of paper to show me that you got the training on how. Don't be like me. Okay, when I got on the Youngstown Police Department back in the dinosaur age, okay, they gave us our gun and our ammo in the shopping bag, in the Kroger's shopping bag, okay, brown shopping bag, right? And then we went to the classroom for our 3 days of training, but they gave us our gun first off, and we get the little bit of training, and I shot my stereo. Okay, because I'm like,
Your 8-track.
stereo with the wooden, the big giant,
The big one that doesn't move. The stationary.
yeah, and it's still there. I still have it in the basement. Okay, and it's still in that wood. That's old wood. But they need to, before you get the gun, before they actually give you your gun, teach all of us, firearm safety. That'd be the first thing.
Right.
Okay, and like I said, the whole thing about the ability, the ability of what that gun can do, how it can go up there and rip your face off your bones, off your skeletal system.
Yeah.
It's not a toy, and it's not the thing that you go to first when you're arguing with your next door neighbor about the front lawn because they cut the grass and the grass was in their driveway. Don't go get your gun. I'm serious.
Yeah.
You don't go get the gun. You guys talk it out.
Well, that is one part of the puzzle that seems to be missing in most young people's lives today. The inability for conflict resolution by talking.
You learned that in the 3rd grade when you're playing on the playground.
Yeah.
I'm not being funny.
So, do they not have recess anymore in schools?
Well, I'll say
I don't know.
Answer that one. One of the things we're doing to mitigate that is I have a group of young people who are working with the jobs program who will be going to the parks every Wednesday to teach conflict management.
Really?
To young people. Yes. Because that is a skill. If your parents were good, you are good.
Yeah.
If your parents were terrible, you're probably terrible unless you learn a different way. To answer your question, I'll just say my concern is I teach in the academy for officers. I deal in areas of diversity and how you get along with community. And my issue is officers will now be on higher alert because I don't know. Before, I would have to at least acknowledge, and then then the officer would have knowledge. But now,
They have to ask first, right? They have to ask you, I think.
so what happens is, think about it. Officers are people,
Yeah.
and so now I want to go home tonight, and I've stopped someone for whatever reason, and I don't have that prior knowledge now. I'm going to be on a little higher alert, and so my concern is I would really want to watch the incidents of community and law enforcement incidents, because this law is going to change the way I approach things now, because I don't have some information that I would have had before, along with, of course, what Ms. Davis said about just people not being trained. But just from my community perspective, that concerns me.
You mentioned this earlier, that fear causes people to act out of character. Imagine you get pulled over by a white police officer. Not that you're racist or anything, but you've been watching George Floyd video over and over and over,
Yeah.
and the media has helped heighten your fear of the police who are there to protect you. And you don't have to disclose that you have a gun. You're fearful for your life. It's
Right.
just, it's a setup for something really, really bad.
Yeah.
I think it's ridiculous. I really do.
Let me say that, yeah, I retired in 2014, but I spent several of my years in the traffic division,
Right.
okay, working by myself. And I made a lot of stops. You treat every stop the same way. Whether, I didn't wait for the computer to come back and say, hey, they got a CCW permit. You approach everyone with the same degree of caution, with the assumption that there's a gun in the car. That doesn't mean that you're pulling your gun on people. You just
You just assume
Caution.
that they have one.
you just, what are you doing? You do what you're supposed to do, what your training says, which is you make the approach cautiously. You don't have to be hyper vigilant. If you're becoming hyper vigilant, then that's probably something that's not related to the reality of the situation. Okay, but you just approach it with caution. And going back to this, what the Reverend here said about the fear in return. I'm gonna shut my mouth because I could put my foot in my mouth on this one. So what I'm gonna say is, people just need to learn how to respect the officer and understand that what that officer is first and foremost a human being.
That's right.
Okay, and if you understand that this is human, and you put yourself, no matter how much training that you can have training, you're still a person. First and foremost, you're a human being. And every foible that I have, he has. And recognize that when you're out there. And you say, well, if I'm walking up on a car and I don't know anyone there in that car, how am I going to make the approach? Cautiously. That's all. And in return, do you fear every police officer? No, you didn't beforehand. You don't have to now.
But the reality is that a police officer in Canfield who makes a stop is not as tense and concerned and aware as a police officer in the city of Youngstown who makes
He
a
might
stop.
be a dead police officer. He better be just as aware. I'm going to
Yeah.
say that. You better be just as cautious and don't stereotype. I'm going to go back to who's the mass shooter?
Yeah, and
What's the profile?
Uvalde was a small
You
town.
better pay
Yeah.
attention to that person. Don't be because they're
Yeah.
white. You're gonna walk up there and approach them. The only one you're gonna approach, maybe somewhat with your guard down, better be someone with my color hair and my mama's age.
I'm all mine.
Okay, or your hair. You better. That's. And even then, you still better be cautious.
Yeah.
Don't. I'm sorry, but I'm just saying. And when I was there, the only people that I was semi-relaxed around, it was stereotype. It was old people. I was like, oh, I mean, I did. They're old. They're grandma and grandpa. So I didn't have that fear.
Yeah.
Everyone else, if they were young, listen. I'm a female. Approach a car with 4, 20-something-year-old white guys. You think I was comfortable?
Yeah.
Canfield or not, I'm looking, it's like, no. So, everybody should, if they're doing their job, following their training, then they make the approach the same way. If you make the approach the same way, then we don't have as many problems. We don't have a George.
Yeah.
I was stopped. I was speeding. I admit, I was speeding. Police officer pulled me over. I had my son in the car with me. My son was on the passenger side. The officer was on the passenger side. He greeted us, was very cordial and respectful. I left that scenario so impressed with the officer that I wrote his precinct. And so that was, I know they're good officers, but that was 10 years ago.
Mm.
And in light of all the things that's happened since then, there's a heightened sense of
Yeah.
just fear.
Yeah.
And so to have laws that would put guns and in people's hands with a lack of training.
Yeah.
You have people who are highly trained who, when put in a situation there, they
Oh,
may
sure.
not be real stable, but to put untrained people, and they're even having conversations now about should we allow teachers
Oh my God, I know.
to have guns.
I don't know any teacher who really wants to take on that additional task of having to
Yeah, that
defend their class.
I will fight that tooth and nail.
But let's talk about that, about schools, given the gun violence in the city of Youngstown. And it almost seems extreme to say, but after I saw what was going on in Texas, after I saw the massacre in New Valley, and I saw children being killed, it dawned on me that it's only a matter of time before Youngstown, a school in Youngstown, becomes the target of some kind of gun-toting individual. And my question is, are we prepared as a community to deal with that kind of a reality? And let's start with you, Pastor, since you're a member of the Youngstown School Board.
Yeah, I don't know how you can get prepared for something like that. And there are some schools that have metal detectors for the safety of the scholars. But how do you prepare for someone who has made up their mind that they're going to massacre large numbers of people? How do you prepare for that? When in many instances the school has been the safest place
Right.
in the environment. And I don't know how we prepare. Certainly with the monies that we've acquired through the city, we can put up cameras and do all the safety precautions, but at the end of the day, the heart is desperately wicked. And if someone has it in their mind to do something like that, we can put in safeguards, but there's not a whole lot we can do. We're not going to be able to stop all things like that.
Well, the kids are trained, aren't they, just like every other school these days? Like we used to be trained for tornado drills. They're trained for the possibility of a
active
mass shooting.
shooters, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Louisville had literally the incident that happened
Yeah.
in Louisville.
Yeah.
Rick Ally, he's the chief
Right.
out there. And Rick was in the building, maybe about 60, 75 feet away. They just finished an exercise, if I'm not mistaken. Am I right on that, guys?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, just finished. And that took place. So like the Reverend said, you can't stop all of it, but we could try, our thing is try. You do everything
Yeah.
that you
That's right.
possibly can,
Right.
that you can think possible to not let it happen. But even then, let's go with an armed teacher. Okay, if that armed teacher, I'm not being funny, if that armed teacher is the one who's having a bad day,
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
what?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
And I'm not
Right.
I'm not kidding when I
Yeah,
say
absolutely.
that.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, literally, that person then has a,
I mean, you take
It's just scary.
and this is what I meant from the educational standpoint. When you go into these schools, these teachers are they're so stressed out.
Yeah.
They don't have the support that they need. Teachers can't go in and just teach algebra. They are dealing with kids that are dealing with trauma. And trauma is something that this word has been going around for maybe the past 5 years, but it's a reality. Many of our kids are dealing with deep trauma.
And they've cut back on the psychologists in schools, haven't they? The folks I've talked to say that there's, in a lot of these area school districts, even in the suburbs, multiple schools are sharing psychologists, or the district has one that goes around.
But
So-
even the psychologists, if you have a traumatized kid, they're not going to go to the psychologist unless there's a relationship
Right,
built.
yeah.
They won't. It doesn't matter how deeply they're hurting. They're not going to talk to someone that they don't know.
Yeah.
And so relationships is the key to a whole lot of this.
And Guy, when you talk to young people, are they afraid? Do they express fear as to?
Absolutely. Yes. And so what happens is your survival mode is amazing. You become callous to make it.
Yeah.
You become, you fix your mind to survive crises and keep going. And so they're very resilient. Let me say that. Our kids and people in this whole city is amazingly resilient.
Right.
But at some point, being resilient and getting through something doesn't mean it's gone.
Right.
And you have to deal with it. And so when he's talking about trauma and ACEs and mental health, that's a whole nother layer that we must deal with. One of the issues that I have, and I can speak, I'm going to tout my wife a little bit, she's working with mental health, is that we want to make sure there's the same response for people in the city when there's a tragedy than as it is everywhere else.
Right.
Right? We somehow believe that people in the inner city, they're just used to it, and so it's okay. And that's not true.
No.
The same trauma, the reactions are still there, so it's really important to go back to that. One, I agree. We set every parameter there to make sure it doesn't happen, and we also make sure that the responses are proper. As you know about Texas, they're going through a turmoil right now
Yeah.
because their response
Oh,
was not
Right.
proper. And so, I guess, not being part of that, but we need to make sure that we're prepared. Not that, what you said, we're not going to sit here and pretend it's not going to happen. Right? We're not going to sit here and say, oh, that's them over there. No. We're going to be prepared and pray whatever you have to do. But then when it's time, we need to intervene properly. So I think that's part of the solution for us.
Go ahead. Are police ready? You a former Youngstown police officer?
They get their training.
Mhm.
You can train, but there is, when you do training and you're shooting at the paper, it's one thing. Then when you're going through a simulation, you can see the difference. And that's through a simulation. When we go through the simulation, where you're going around the corner and things like that, and it's literally, when you get into it and the sweat's pouring down and the whole thing, and you're stressed. And you're in a simulation, you know that. So you have all this training, and you hope that it's sufficient, but with everything being absolutely perfect, you're still dealing with a person.
Right.
So you train. That's all you can do is train and hope to be ready. Just like you can never train too much for something like this. Never. And if it never happens, you just say, "Thank you, Jesus."
That's right.
I swear. You don't say, "Well, that was a waste of money." No, you say, "Thank you. That training was there, and thank goodness we never had to use it."
Yeah.
And that's how we look at it.
Wow.
Keep that training going. Never cut the training back. Keep it going, and then you hope it works. Because like I said, Lowellville just had, literally that morning, it was maybe a half an
Right.
hour beforehand, if that long, training.
It just had it. Yep.
And here's the chief of police, Rick Ally, who's a Youngstown police
Youngstown.
veteran,
Yeah.
who himself has been in many, many tight situations where he's had to draw his gun and use it. And fortunately, he was there, and he kept his cool, and he did what the training required. So train, keep training, and then hope that it doesn't happen
Wow.
here in Youngstown.
That's right.
By the way, when we talk about the crime here in Youngstown, we had a shooting at a Waffle House
Yes,
in
ma'am.
Austintown. A drive-by shooting, I think it was. Was it Austintown
They
or?
were shot on the freeway, and then they drove them to that Waffle House.
Yeah, and it's like, so it can happen anywhere.
That's right.
yeah.
Anywhere it
It
can
is
happen.
happening everywhere now.
Exactly.
I mean, what you were talking about, Canfield being less dangerous, that was when I was in high school. That's not the case anymore.
Yeah. So, you know, you just can't say, yeah, we do have our high, the numbers are the numbers. The dead kids, they're not, I say the numbers are the numbers, they're also kids.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, and 18 years of age, 17, on down
14.
to that baby.
That's
And
right.
I don't want to get into it, but we're never going to eliminate it. I'm not being funny when I say this. We will never eliminate violent crime anywhere in the world. Never going to happen. But can we get it down? Can we get it back to the, quote, old normal, where people did learn how to reason and talk?
That's right.
Okay? That's what we want. We want, I don't want to be cruel, but I don't want to see another 15-year-old or 16-year-old shot dead in Youngstown.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to have their lives.
That's right. That's right.
Our stats used to be people were getting killed when they were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s,
That's
70s.
right.
Now we got teenagers and babies.
Yeah.
So you said previously that a gun is not a hammer. It has one role and one role
That's
alone.
right.
Yeah.
So
It's a killing
how do we get rid
instrument.
of all the guns?
You don't get rid of all the guns, but you do. Well, first off, you can harden the country, but we'll say, well, that's not going to prevent that, and that. It's like, but if it prevents one, isn't that enough?
Right.
But we don't know if it will prevent, because we've done bupkis. How can you say it won't work when we haven't tried to see if it failed?
I have a question. So I recently saw a video online that The Daily Show did some years ago in Switzerland, where they apparently have as many guns as we have in this country. But the difference is that they all serve like a, I don't know, 1 to 2 year public service after school. So they all get trained in how to use these guns. With the laws that are being passed around the country, and with what just happened in Columbus, can Youngstown do anything to counteract that?
The
You
law?
know? Yeah. Can
No.
Youngstown implement a law that overrides what Columbus says about
No.
training or
No.
nothing?
No.
Wow.
And in Switzerland, they all have mandatory service.
Yes.
Okay, and they're all trained with the rifles and things.
Right.
And it's also a pretty much homogeneous country.
Culture.
I mean, there's not this. I'm sure there are smaller pockets, but the culture is almost cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Right.
Ours is not. Literally, you go to the south side of Youngstown,
Right.
and you see
3.
at 3.
15, I know, just
Okay.
different, neighborhoods. It's amazing. You're right.
It's
Different
amazing.
culture. Yeah, you're right.
You can see the houses that are in the $100,000 in rates, and then you have the other houses that are worth $5,000.
That's it.
Then you have a mentality that says, well, because my house is worth $100 and something thousand, I should get more services, and because those people they're so poor, they don't need as much.
Wow.
Okay, you have to have that thing that says we are in this together.
Yeah.
That's I am not huggy bear and tree hugger and kumbaya and all that kind of stuff there. I would consider myself somewhat of a hard kind of person. I've been called that before. But I understand that we have to look at each other as being together. We're not separate, we're not individuals. And so much of what we do take place is because we are in our own little places. Right over here, right here, just me. It's like, no, it's us, and not hugging, not tree hugging, but understanding that we're all in this thing together.
But finally, taking off on what Councilwoman said, are you a tree hugger, and do you have, what is the future? How do you view things
So-
going from here on now?
I am a person who values people. And I believe that people are I believe that people are the most important thing we deal with. Because people is what's going to make everything work. We don't have a city without people. We don't have a neighborhood, a family. This is, I mean, and it's really this serious. A lot of times we get involved in programs and equipment and all these things, but without healthy people, none of it goes. And so you ask me, I'm a person that understands that if we have healthy, balanced people, then we get better no matter what we do. The opposite says if we do not, then we're going to struggle because the people are not good. And in Africa, there's a tribe, and they talk to each other, and when they do their greeting, it's called Kansera Injera. And they say, they don't say hello, they say, how are the children? It's the Maasai tribe. They say, how are the children? And they answer, the children are well. And if they say the children are well, then the tribe is good. But if they say the children are not well, we know we have an emergency. And so what I see is we have to continue to work so that our children are well, and if they're well, our community can get well. And that's where we kind of go.
And Pastor, how do we get our children well?
We get well first.
Hey,
Yes,
We,
that's right. That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
yeah,
That's right.
you know, kids are kids. Our children are, they're going through those cycles. They're doing what kids do. If we don't show them a better way,
That's right.
then
That's good.
we're part of the problem and not the solution.
That's right.
You know, as I was listening to both of you all talk, and the word imago Dei came to my mind. And what that means is the image of God. And so, as adults, if I could look at Anita and see her as made in the image of God,
Yeah, that's good.
if I could look at you and see you as made in the image of God, and you could look at me and with the idea that, oh, that guy is made in the image of God, do you think that would change the way that I treat Miss Davis? Regardless if she's a Republican or Democrat or black or white or Indian or Asian, I think it will make a difference. And so we help our children by getting well ourselves. We're in this COVID pandemic. If you're infected, then you need to get well.
Right.
Otherwise, you are
That's
going
it.
to infect the
Right.
population.
That's it.
And so
Yes.
I still have confidence that we can positively infect Youngstown, just one person at a time.
That's it.
But it starts with seeing our children, seeing each other as made in the image of God.
Well, Councilwoman Davis, Ms. Bernie, and Pastor Donaldson, we do appreciate you spending time with us. We're going to continue this conversation because I think it's an important conversation. There are some issues that were raised today that we will pursue. And as we said, we are going to invite the mayor and the police chief and perhaps even you come back on and sort of have these discussions, because in the end, you know, we are all in this together.
That's right.
This is our
That's right.
community. You know, those of us who've chosen to live in the city of Youngstown for many, many years, you know, are vested in this community. So thank you again, all of you.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
All right.